Dr. Kimberly A. Redding is a history professor at Carroll University and a board member of the Waukesha County Historical Society and Museum. Bonnie Byrd is the executive director of the Waukesha County Historical Society and the Southeast Region representative for the Wisconsin Historical Society Council for Local History. Welcome, Bonnie and Kim.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right, I think next slide.
Yeah, good. Hello, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. So Clio, or the Clio in this case. So Clio is sort of the patron saint, the goddess of history, and TheCliocom, and the is just important so you land at the right site. TheClio.com is a free to use website and app that was the brainchild of a professor at Marshall University in West Virginia, David Trowbridge. And he created it very explicitly to pull undergraduate students and community members into local history, to help people see the past all around them. So the TheClio.com provides enough guidance and enough structure to help, I would say, lay people, students, volunteers, walk through research in historical sources so to be able to find and create stories all around them. I think we can go to the next slide. I learned about TheClio.com at a conference. It was one of these 4-hour workshops before a conference begins. This was in January of 2019, and David Trowbridge was there and just sort of taking this site national. What was exciting about it for me was a couple things. First of all, it's free. And you can see some of the grants that David has gotten to keep funding. Free is very good, somebody put in the chat. So David basically writes a grant, and when he gets a grant, he throws the money at his website designers and says, this is the comments I've gotten. These are the comments I've gotten. Here's how we need to update. So the site and the app are being updated as he has funds. And the idea is to link places, physical places, to the past, right? So you are walking around and you see a place, and what is the story of the past that you see? So the screen in front of you shows you the opening page of TheClio.com, and you can see already on there, you can search for locations in the search bar at the top. You can search by a name or a title. And as we've all gotten used to on Google Maps and WebQuest, you can search with your mouse. I'm waving my mouse, but you can't see it. You can search with your mouse right there in the map. And next slide, please. So what this immediately sparked in my mind at this workshop at the conference was a learning activity for the research methods course for history majors here at Carroll University. So this is a class that I talk about it as sort of the lab class for history majors. It's hands-on. It's moving from being a consumer of history. So all of our majors like stories about the past. They like reading them, they like watching them, a lot of watching them. But very few have ever done research that is not online, that is not basically Googling something and reading what comes up. So to me, TheClio.com provided a way to expand on a partnership that we had with the County Museum, which Bonnie will talk about in just a minute, and to pull students into physical archives and think about how to tell stories with them and present the stories to a public audience. So I wanted an authentic project that students could do, writing and creating narratives for somebody other than me. And the 3 photos there, those are some of our mostly sophomore level students in the research room down at the Historical Society. Next slide.
And this is where I jump in. So this is Bonnie Byrd. So as Kimberly shared, this was really born of an existing partnership where we had been hosting students for a number of years every spring semester. And so when Kimberly initially pitched me the idea of utilizing Clio, what got me kind of over the hump of trying to adapt and use a new tool was the fact that fundamentally it was building on the knowledge and skills and resources that we already had in the Archive and Research Center. That the ask really was just about changing the output. It wasn't necessarily about radically upending how it was we drew out of our archive and pulled materials for students. We, I think, smartly tried not to change too much other than adding that Clio piece.
That's true.
Part of that being, we had already landed on focusing on World War I histories, biographies that students had in previous years, drawn on a collection of service cards that we hold in the archive. They would draw those cards at random, and then we would start guiding them through resources that they could utilize to write biographies. And so I listed out just some of those, probably familiar to many of you, right? When a researcher comes in with a request for an individual, a biographic research request or a genealogic research request. These are the types of materials that we already know to pull. And so that kind of realization for me was key to saying yes, because I appreciate for all of us, it can sometimes be hard to say yes to a new tool or resource because of that idea that I'm not sure what I'm going to have to commit to doing in order to make this work. So that's one of our, I think, first key takeaways for using the Clio: define the scope of project from the onset. And so we were able to do that right off the bat. And I will ask for the next slide and let Kimberly talk a little bit more about our specific project.
Great. So yes, as Bonnie said, this let us build on the resources of the museum and really change the product. And that's very important for me because students and I work differently when the audience is someone other than me. And by using TheClio.com, students get, for their resumes, for their future internships, they get a stable link and a stable online publication that they can direct outsiders, potential employers to show, here is a product of my research. Mm-hmm. Here's my ability to navigate this website, so to use a web tool and to communicate appropriately. So what we've created ourselves, this is our example, what we've created in TheClio.com is a World War I heritage trail for Waukesha County. And this is a living, growing beast. It grows by a few entries every year. If you wanted to find this on TheClio.com, you could search by title, if you happen to know that the title is World War I Heritage Trail or keyword, or you could search by the place, Waukesha, Wisconsin. And you would find this trail. You would also find a Carroll University Historic District. So you see the map there that if you wanted to drive or bike, probably drive this particular trail, the Clio coordinates that for you. So if you have the app on your smartphone, You can ask Siri or Alexa or whoever it is, and she will walk you through the different stops on the trail and show you then in the phone app the same information that we're going to try and show you online. So that's on the right side of the screen. On the left side of the screenshot, you see some of the entries on the tour. And what we're going to do now is kind of jump in, dive into one or maybe two sample entries so you can get a sense of what the students produced. So if we could have the next slide, please, that would be great. Excellent. So there you see on the left how you could search and find a Clio entry on your phone or a trail. You can use this while traveling. So if I'm not driving, I can sit in the car and just say, here I am in Poughkeepsie, New York. Are there any sites near me? And it is likely that there are. I think they're closing in on 40,000 different entries at this point. So we're going to look at one or two. So Kristen or Vicky, I'm not sure who's doing slides. If that link works to Clinton Breeze.
Huzzah.
Hooray. I don't know if it gets, maybe that's big enough, I think. So this is one of the projects that a student worked on. Their assignment from me and from Bonnie really was to connect a person. So the person listed on that enlistment record, we call them draft cards, link the person, a place in Waukesha County, and some aspect of World War I.
Yeah.
And
I'll add two very
go
brief,
ahead. Yeah.
because again, the students were drawing those at random. Those cards did have, I'll call it some baseline vital information. So it included, but some of them were incomplete. Generally, though, it would have parents' names, it would have an address or at least a route number for home address, oftentimes school through attendance at college, often Carroll University, which was another lovely connection for students, and often religious affiliation as well, and trade, if they had a trade or profession prior to enlistment. So those pieces of information too were key to us being able to help, excuse me, my phone's ringing, help the students connect to those physical locations.
So that's what the students got, and that was their assignment. Beyond that, the door was wide open, and keeping the assignment that simple, this person, someplace in Waukesha County, some aspect of World War I, immediately sort of popped some bubbles for the students, because the address that was listed may or may not still exist today.
Yes. I will note too, City of Waukesha addresses changed between 1919 and 1920. So these addresses are circa 1916, 17. So we could guarantee for any student working in the city, your address on the card is incorrect to what the current address is going to be.
And in some cases, that address is an apartment, which is now a factory. It also sort of popped their expectations about the war service. So Clinton Breeze was kind of the best case example. So this student found relatively quickly, if you could scroll back up a little bit, a number of images, a number of photos. I don't know if you could open any of those images or not, but this was a student a veteran who showed up pretty quickly in local newspapers, in Carroll University records. So this one you can see, this is shown a photo from the Waukesha Freedman, the local paper. And this student figured out fairly quickly that Clinton Breeze was in the Army Air Corps, and so could learn about that realm of service. That family is also longstanding in Waukesha County. So for this student, the challenge was how to focus a narrative, how to make a story about this individual. So you can close that image. And yeah, go ahead and scroll down. We obviously are not going to read the whole backstory and context. So for this student, they got a lot of information that is in the backstory. What they struggled with was trying to figure out what is the piece that holds that together. It goes from a bunch of individual facts about this person to a story with basically a thesis or a point. And that's what you see in the last paragraph of this entry. This is the student's attempt to tie together the different aspects of Clinton Breeze's life that Cade is the student that Cade learned about. That he came from a humble background and was unusual at the time in that he was able to attend college and graduate and become an aviator, and that he was also unusual in his actions and contributions to Waukesha today. And eventually became head of Waukesha Savings and Loan. So that's kind of the best case scenario entry. And you can close that out. And if you can go to Earl Hardy, if we have time, this one was a little more difficult. So it was the same assignment, right? Draw the draft card, connect this person to a place in Waukesha County and some aspect of World War I. And if you read the first sentence of this student's introduction, you see that they had to do a little digging to make a story come to life. So the place that this student found was Merrill Hills Country Club, which is probably 4 or 5 miles west of Carroll's campus. The student didn't even know there was a golf course there. And this is one of my favorite starting sentences. Until a cow was struck and killed by a bolt of lightning, Merrill Hills Country Club was traditional rolling farmland in southeastern Wisconsin. If that doesn't make you want to read more, I don't know what does. So this let us talk about pedagogically, how do you pull somebody in and make them want to learn more? Mm-hmm. Which is a challenge for, I think, anyone who does history, and a lot of our students go on to become junior high or high school history teachers. So how do you pull that story, how do you pull that story out to pull readers in? So I think you can scroll down a little bit. Yeah, they're great. And click on that first image of the uniform. So this student struggled because Earl Hardy did not leave much in the way of records about his military wartime service. And that in and of itself is a really important historical lesson. Not everyone who fought in World War I was at Verdun. or, the Battle of the Marne. There's always in every conflict many, 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 many service people behind the front lines, not in the famous battles. And if I remember correctly, Earl Hardy was one of those. So this student had to kind of stretch and say, in this caption, he likely wore a uniform like this.
Mhm.
This was the best she could do. And to do that, this student had to go looking online, in this case, at the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico, Virginia. And this student happens to be a former Marine herself. So she had a clue that this museum existed and was able to sort of milk those connections and think about, okay, I know he was a Marine. I know something about what Marines did in World War I. How can I pull those together? And then I think the next picture, when the student found this picture out of, I think this was out of the Freeman again, this was when she knew she had a story. Earl Hardy pointing to the spot where he, as an insurance adjuster of some kind, was checking out a claim about the loss of a cow. So you could close the image. So this was her connection to Waukesha County. Most of the narrative that you read is about what, I think it's the 13th Division, no, the 13th Battalion of the 4th Marine Brigade did in France. That's as far as she got, really, with his connection to World War I. But she found one and could say, this is what he likely did. And so she's taken him from spending time with his grandparents in the summer in Waukesha, eventually moving here. She's taken him from there to Madison for university, to France, where he got the flu, back to Wisconsin, finishing his degree. And the connection to the county is this golf course.
Yeah.
And I'll just stop there, but this is sort of the harder case scenario.
So
I'll turn it back over to Bonnie. Sorry, I go deep into the stories.
No, not a problem. If we could have the next slide. I know we're running tight on time. I will try not to just talk too quickly. But before I get immediately into outcomes, I'm going to cheat ahead on myself a little bit. But one of the things of digging into those stories a little bit is Clio is built with the idea, right, that we're pinning stories to physical locations, but as the students discovered and what we discovered along with them is that you can let story lead location as well.
Right.
So if you don't have a strong sense of these are specific locations I want to highlight using the Clio, you can go about it the other way, and you can find the locations that allow you to place story on landscape. But in terms of outcomes that we've seen from this project, one and most immediately is new student and volunteer engagement using the Clio. The students were able to produce something that had a wider impact, both for their own work, also for our organization, that we were able to start utilizing this tool. And my existing volunteers in Research Center space learning a new tool along with them. We now have these self-guided tours available to the public, anybody coming to visit our area. We also had the students publish, several of the students published in our Landmark magazine that the Historic Society does 4 times a year. They presented to a local senior history club. So now they're getting in front of a new audience, live and in person, back when we could do that. So things that we didn't necessarily foresee going into it, but constantly trying to see how we could connect the work on the Clio through other avenues that we already had for connecting with our public and with new audiences. If I could get the next slide, please. So wanted to acknowledge, and without getting too much into the weeds, the basic process of building an entry. And I really break it down in those three steps. The Clio website also takes you through the process in these 3 steps. So again, location, introduction, backstory, and context, then that is the story itself. The examples that Kimberly talked through for our World War I Heritage Tour is built on individual biographic based backstories and context. And then supporting materials. That's the other key piece for me, especially as this was a project that started with leveraging the resources of our archive. It is fundamentally rooted in connecting stories to those resources, which also then allows folks to, as they discover these Clio entries, discover the resources in our repositories. And then they're reaching out to us more frequently, and then they're wanting to learn more. I have had reach outs from family members, descendants of some of the servicemen, reaching out because they've read the stories through Clio or read the story published in our Landmark magazine. And that's been a really tremendous connection point because they know where this information is being held and preserved. If I could get the next slide. So a couple of quick screenshots. If you do start using the Clio, so you kind of know what to expect. Again, they do start you with a location. If I could get the next slide though. Part of starting with location is this step, checking for duplicates. One of the things to be aware of in the Clio is that in order to help keep it user-friendly, there's a want to avoid creating duplicate entries for the same physical location. And so if you do enter a location and there appears to be an existing entry for that site, that would populate here at this stage so that you could look and say, you know, here's a site entry for, say, 1893 Waukesha County Courthouse. That happens to be the building our Historic Society and Museum is in. I could open up that entry and edit it and add information to that entry rather than having to create 2 entries, right? Again, with the user in mind, having that single entry that we're contributing more information to is a better experience for them than them having to decide which is the right entry for what they want to learn about. Next slide, please. This, though, is really the meat of the work in Clio, because ultimately, if you are looking to build a heritage trail as we did or another tour type, it's this fill out the details. But as you can see, there is pre-population of fields here with a little bit of guidance, including things like word count guidance. So there is support for you in writing these entries along the way. One of the things that I have learned or encountered as we have continued to look at using Clio is a hesitance at first from some of my volunteers who maybe haven't written at length in a while. For a student, they're accustomed to paper writing in a way that, say, a volunteer who's a retiree hasn't been asked to write 800 words recently. And so really working through the different sections that Clio lays out for them, talking about, okay, you're going to start by writing the introduction, figuring out the hook. Not everybody is as lucky as to have a cow struck by lightning, but thinking through those kind of sections of the writing process. The Clio does a nice job of trying to help break that up. But that certainly was one of those kind of unforeseen hurdles, I'll say, that we had to figure out how to negotiate over or around as we've continued using the Clio. Next slide, please. I just mentioned, and Kimberly, if it's all right with you, I might go over this real quick.
Just go ahead. Yep.
Time. There are a number of different tour types. Kimberly mentioned that with each new grant support received for the project, they expand. And here is kind of an example of what some of those expansions have been. When we first used the Clio, it was build individual entries, and then you can create a heritage trail that essentially can link those entries together. I think there may have been a driving and biking tour option as well. Now there are 6 different kind of tour options that you can build. So you still have the thematic tour or heritage trail. They've added a virtual museum or site tour that really in last year especially was in response in part to sites, local historic sites, cultural sites asking for a way to better tell their stories that were otherwise closed due to the pandemic. Walking tours and hiking trails. I know DNR in the Southeast region is looking at developing a hiking trail tour on the Clio right now. Digital story maps, then I wanted to mention briefly, that was an answer to folks asking for a way to lay on kind of larger context information that didn't really have a good location to live. So with story maps, you can kind of select a region or a city or a town or a neighborhood that story map kind of lives over, that tells the broad story, and then you can highlight specific locations within it, if that makes sense, without having to have everything tied to an entry in the same way as you do with a heritage trail. There's also an option now to create contributing entries rather than a standalone entry, which is another step at trying to allow multiple stories to be told across landscape. I think many of us have talked in the last year about how do we tell a multiplicity of stories that
Right.
kind of live on top of each other in the same geographic space, that we don't all experience a location in the same way. Some of these tools now that have been integrated allow those multiple stories to be told laid on top of each other. Next slide, and I think final slide. A little bit over time. I'll beg everyone's indulgence, but if there are questions, comments, inspirations.
And while people are thinking, I would just add that I will not speak for Bonnie, but I am not a digital native. I am not a tech person. I started teaching, sort of in the chalk and talk. So one of the real perks to me is that Clio really, truly, truly walks you through
Yes.
how to create an entry.
Yes,
And provides, you saw it on one of the screens, also YouTube videos that show you each part. So
they also, I know, expanded staff in the last year. They
right.
were always very responsive, but they have added staff positions, I believe PhD fellowship positions,
Right.
to provide additional support. There is a process as an institution. You can reach out and create an institutional profile that then allows you to have that kind of editor level sign in, and then you can share a login with all of your volunteers, or in this case, the students could
Right.
have a single kind of shared password to log in to the institutional profile so that we could review materials.
Right.
That is all very straightforward. There's a lovely straightforward packet that gets sent to you as well with instructions. So they
Right.
do try and provide every opportunity for support along the way.
Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank
And some
you.
great comments in the chat. The TheClio.com will be getting a lot of use later